and thank you for joining us on the second episode of the Horror Emporium. Just a quick little side note about this episode. We recorded this episode back in October or November. You'll probably notice that it's a little rougher around the edges than our last episode was, but I still think we have a lot of great discussion about the game, which is Alone in the Dark. Props to Bombasticat for addicted it correctly in the last episode. Hopefully down the line we'll be able to give you guys something special for correctly predicting the game of the next episode. But for right now, all we have is a nice hearty congrats. Yeah, so if you have any feedback on the episode, feel free to leave a comment below. We're still working out the kinks in this, but we're always happy to hear different ways we can improve, suggestions for future games that we're going to play, and anything else that you have to say. Feel free to let us know. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting, exciting stuff going on at Rogue Raven right now. Next couple of months, we'll be having a lot to share and talk to you guys about our game. But as far as this series goes, we'll have a lot of exciting guests up and coming in the future episodes, so make sure to stay tuned for that. No teaser, unfortunately, for the next episode. We're still trying to book a guest, get them all set up. But yeah, make sure to join us again on April 27th, 2 Fridays from now, for the next episode. But if you're like me and you want to keep track of dates, make sure to subscribe and get those notifications for when that episode goes up. So anyways, without further ado, here is me, Brandon, and Ryan playing Alone in the Dark. Enjoy.
I assume there's more, right?
Yeah, that's not the ideal playthrough. So the ideal playthrough, it's kind of unfair because, this is a game from back in the day, right? Where all the info that you need to start off is in the manual.
It was kind of like a way to brief the player in some ways back, when there actually was a manual. It actually did serve a purpose, I felt like. What I was going to mention when you brought up movement, there was a type of movement in the first Silent Hill, and I also believe it's in the second Silent Hill, that I never realized. But if you're holding, the tank button square, if you hit L1 or R1, you actually strafe quickly rather than just one sidestep if you're not holding square. So you can actually run to the left or to the right in a very swift manner. But I never knew that when I was younger. I never had that figured out.
Interesting. Yeah.
Interesting.
I think
It
too,
definitely felt that.
like Silent Hill, by the time Silent Hill comes around, right, you have like probably 10 years, close to 10 years of these type of games.
Sure.
And, they still have those tank controls, but it's like a familiar thing that players have. Like, I have this controller, and, left stick is going to be movement.
You can master those controls if you want to call it that. I mean, even of playing just for a couple of days, I mean, I'm pretty efficient, but there are still some, inefficiencies with that type of movement. So
Right.
Yeah, most definitely.
And I think it really shines in this game because I think, it's a weird byproduct of its time because, if I had good controls in this game, if I was able to, like, control my character well, like, the tension wouldn't be on in these fights.
sure.
But yeah, if you read the manual, and some of the background information here, you'll probably get a clue about a note back here. This is the other thing is that you have like one interact with the world button, and it does all these different things, but you have to change between them in
Oh,
the
really?
menus. So it's not like, I have like the square button for search and triangle for fight or something. You have to
And
go
then-
in here and switch them.
Hmm.
But
Thankfully, we've gotten away from that.
yeah, but you get this information. The game does try to do interesting things for like feeding you information about the environment. I took a little bit too much time getting this letter, but if you read it,
They are coming!
you get
I
this
have
little
freed hellish forces.
audio
Another
text
price must be paid.
story.
Their cetera is the prey of evil. The sun has set. They will find my body, but will not have my soul. I can
Regale
imagine
me
the
with your
master's fury
tale.
and the terror in the hearts of his slaves.
So, obviously not as scary anymore. Horror and interactivity, or horror and media, just as advanced, right?
Oh
Like,
yeah.
Just having a guy read this letter doesn't create the same kind of emotional response. And getting messed up by this dude.
It's all good. That's the beauty of these types of games, right?
Yeah.
Trial and error.
So now I'm trying to fight here. And it kind of sounds like you're just giving the monster a good slap.
Oh, you kicked him right there.
Went all Jet Li.
Yeah, this is Victorian era guy, just throwing the kung fu moves, throwing the wide kicks.
Kind of
Hulk
looks like Chuck
Leg
Norris.
drop.
So it's not the combat isn't unbalanced. It's just very hard to do because you're locked in, and you have 3 fighting or 4 fighting poses. But you can't move when you're fighting. Same for
Right.
like weapons. Just another thing. Oh,
Well, there you go.
Wants a hug.
Like Michael Jackson.
oh no.
Smart. What are the saving systems like in this game?
It's a save anywhere. There's no conceit behind it.
So you can basically save right before you go into some hard fight and then restart from there each time.
Yeah. Yeah, so you can cheese it a little bit. So that's that kind of brought up an interesting thing. What do you guys think about like death in horror games?
Insofar as what?
As in just the so you know, you're trying to create like tension in a horror sequence, right? And you know, things like start going crazy and you end up dying, right? But then you have to go through that same, like for this example, right? Like I've done this, I've played this level a couple of times just because you know, the first time I played this game, those encounters were really hard. And so when you die, you know, oh hey, there's gonna be a guy that jumps through the window. Oh hey, there's gonna be this guy that's gonna come through the floor. So death kind of like is this reset, right? That you have this advantage. Whereas
So
like,
the whole feedback loop thing.
yeah.
Died this way one time, so don't do that again.
Do you guys think that that kind of ruins some of the horror moments, or does it help enforce them?
Are you saying that as like we should change it as developers so that way the puzzle would be different because you had died before? Is that what you're getting at?
I mean, sure. I mean, you think about this like in a modern game, right? Like you wouldn't, the first area you're not allowed to die.
Sure.
It doesn't matter. Or you just saw a guy like ripped in half, and like the guy's coming for you. Like, you know, there'll be some Deus Ex Machina that saves you, or some plot point, or anything, right? This game just throws you right into it, and it's like, all right, you know, there's gonna be this guy that comes out of this window, and a guy that comes up out of this floor. You have to deal with them in this space. And if you die, I mean, you carry over your knowledge of the space, but Yeah, so I guess, it is a lot like a feedback loop, but with death, like if I didn't get this, and I just kept doing this over and over again, and there wasn't any options,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
yeah, then it's not a horror game, then I'm just,
Frustrated.
Just
yeah,
an exercise in how tedious you can be.
yeah. And there's games I've played, modern games like that too, it's a horror game, you want to kind of keep it rolling. You don't want to, at least at the beginning anyways, right? You don't want to punish the player when they're just getting a handle on moving around, right?
Oh, of course.
It kind of reminds me of Resident Evil 4. Granted, it was one of the first times that over-the-shoulder camera, or it was the first time for Resident Evil, but it definitely pioneered that type of camera for other types of games. But anyway, you basically get thrown right into that village with that chainsaw guy. That was a very, very challenging start to a horror game. Granted, it was the shift towards more of a shooter style, but it was still very, very challenging. I felt, at least for the age that I was. Not that I definitely, we all beat it, but it was something that you really had to work at.
I think, yeah, that opening area in Resident Evil 4 is quite something because in a way they're like oh, stairways that way. In a way they're still training you, but the illusion of like the danger is still there, right? Because
Yeah.
you can easily, I mean, you're gonna get hit by the chainsaw guy, right? You're gonna die, and that's gonna be a thing. But you still have like tools to like, I'm gonna run away from him and then turn around and take pot shots at him.
Sure. You made it downstairs. And you got your bow.
Yeah. So this is another thing. This being an older game, it's influenced a lot by adventure games. Um, and old school adventure games, just about searching every corner of the room
Oh yeah.
and very, well rendered for the time, but hard to see areas. Like, okay, now I know there's no items in this room. And the game will do that all the way throughout. It's part of the game. I think we've had some discussions about like how we don't want things to be like impossible to find. We obviously want that investigation element, but making it, designing the experience to be player friendly, I guess.
Yeah, accessible. You can't. We don't yet have the capability to make everything just sit right there and not have, something draw the player's eye to it. Otherwise, it might take them a whole lot longer to find something, or they may miss something entirely, end up on the other side of the map and need it, and then be frustrated that they have to go all the way back.
Yeah. And that's like, I guess um, Resident Evil, these games, they all kind of did that, and they were kind of like accepted as like part of the game. I'm also stuck on this
Oh, yeah.
chair.
But at least the keys would sparkle for the most part, and the ammunition boxes, those were also colored pretty vibrantly compared to the rest of the game. So I mean, they did some things to try to draw it, but it's not like maybe The Last of Us where there's that tiny little circle. I think that's a pretty intuitive way to do it, where there's that tiny circle until you get close enough, and then you see a little action button inside of that circle. And I think that was pretty well done for a stripped down HUD style.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It is like a non-diegetic thing, as in like you're having the UI in the world, but it's like so minimal. So it does kind of simulate that, right? Of searching, like if you're in a area near something and you kind of see that pop up, you as the player are still kind of like searching, but you're not, brushing up against every wall, being like tapping the search button, This is interesting. Doors, don't believe close behind you. Oh no. So, we just picked up the saber. Oh, an interesting thing about this, right? So every item in the game has like similar uses. Like they all have an ability to throw them, or drop or put them down. You know, normally that would be the drop and put down is pretty standard, but throwing them right is interesting because I can take this lamp and just throw it at an enemy. So it's you can go through your whole inventory.
Does it damage him?
Yeah, it totally damages them.
Yes.
So it's kind of interesting that they give the player that option. I don't know if it's fully well realized, but you know, I could see yourself being in like a dire situation where like you've run out of ammo and you're just like, I'll throw this can at this monster.
It would be awesome if it was the death blow.
So it broke the sword. Now I can just use the stub. I defeat the enemy.
Turned into corn puffs, huh?
Yeah, he exploded into little packing peanuts, it looked like.
Those old school particle effects.
Yeah.
Right?
That are all pixels.
Can you imagine, like, they're probably like, oh man, we gotta drop from 16 to 15 particles because it's bringing this machine to its knees. But yeah, it's, you know, the combat's interesting because it's fair in the context of the game. Once you get it, it's obviously very hard to get into, but it's fair, but it's challenging at the same time. Like, you know, you got to survive multiple combat encounters while, like, you know, worrying about survival horror mechanics such as your health, such as this sword. Right, I used it once and it broke. You know, my health right now is 17, and we've yet to encounter any kind of health pack. So the, you know, the overall game loop of this, or the overall game loop that Alone in the Dark has is like very standard, even today, like for survival horror.
Yep.
Oh, we have another guy sneaking in. Something you can do too is, you know, you can be passive in runs. You can run away and trap monsters places. You know, like I walked in the second room, so he's not gonna come follow me. Do you guys think that, do you like passive mechanics in games? Because, I know, like, within the Evil Within, there's a lot of, like, the hiding mechanics and stealth mechanics. Were you guys fans of that at all?
No, I mean, I like it in its... As far as I'm concerned, building a game should have parts, at least survival horror, should have parts where you should try to hide, where you shouldn't try to hide. I mean, that's going to be the player's decision ultimately, but there has to be a reward for sticking your neck out. Don't think that that's always the case.
Right. Yeah, like you can overestimate like a combat scenario, and if it's gonna go bad, you're gonna run.
Ah, camera change.
Yeah. Some interesting little filmic techniques to kind of set things up. Obviously a very bad angle to try and fight something at.
That's almost just like Resident Evil, where the Cerebus comes through the window and you sort of see it at its perspective before it jumps through. I'm pretty certain that that's the case. Otherwise, it's one of those monsters after you get back from that other building, and it's gosh, I can't remember the name of it, which is upsetting, but it looks like, you know, a monkey or something like that, and it's got those big long arms. It's hunched over. You guys remember which ones I'm talking about?
Oh, I know what you're talking. Yeah, the little
And you see that perspective where it comes into that room, basically.
yeah. I mean, Resident Evil does that a lot, right?
Sure.
Like They took like that thing that just happened, the monster coming into the window, and they made a series out of it.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that you can trace like certain things like that. Like obviously, this game is very different from Resident Evil. It's trying to do totally different things than Resident Evil's trying to do, but they still borrowed probably from this game. We'll probably borrow a lot for our game, I imagine.
Yeah. I mean, we'll definitely be, one thing we'll be guilty of is being influenced, but I do believe that we innovate in a lot of ways that others haven't. And, story-wise, I believe we really drive something home that's our own, too.
So, if I leave this enemy, walk through the floor, I don't know if I walked through the floor there, but it's like an instant death thing. It's a shame that, if the enemy is going to come out this way and across it, that you can't, like, out-trick it, like, walk it into the trap. That wasn't supposed to be a deep design statement, that was just... We're not, I guess I shouldn't think about that since we're not trying to remaster this, but, something, obviously we can't go into super detail about all the things we're working on because things might change. We want to keep some things close to our chest.
Right.
But, something I've been thinking about a lot for, enemies and mechanics and stuff is, like, for example, if the player can walk around and pick up items and interact with the world, maybe the enemies can too. And, let's say, you're being stalked by a monster, right? Or, you're in a fight with a monster and he sees like a glass bottle or something like that. Like maybe he could like pick that up and use it against you or anything like that.
Sure. Break down a door or something like that.
Yeah, break down a door. So this is interesting. These guys. So it's a shame that they have the fight music come in here, because it would be nice if it was just the
No.
the mood setting music. Since these guys are enemies walking into this room.
That is what nightmares are made of.
I'm sure they got emails about people, not sleeping because of this.
Right.
I'm sure that they would have had to.
Yeah.
I mean, what was this, early 90s?
This was 91. So, this is probably like one of the first 3D games where they were actually rendering stuff with like some kind of texture on them.
Yeah, this is 91 BT before Titanic. That's when everything began.
So I'm trying to remember. I think you have to.
There you go.
Yeah. So, you come into that scenario and you're like, well, what do I do with those guys? I have no idea. I guess I'll come back here.
Break a vase.
Break a vase. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of old school adventure game puzzle design and stuff.
Yeah, some of them were just so tedious. I found like there was a game that I played a long time ago. I guess probably around I think it was King's Quest. And I was totally into it until I realized that the book was gone. and I couldn't actually advance in the story without the book.
Oh wow.
What's on page 16? The third word on page 16. You got to put it in here. So I guess that's kind of anti-piracy type thing, but aggravating as a young man.
Oh, yeah.
What is it that you're trying to do here in this hallway now? Are you attempting to do something near the statue?
So yeah, there's this puzzle's a little bit more involved than what I'm doing. I just kind of went through the ropes of it. But basically, upstairs in the attic, there's a little bookshelf, and one of the books it gives you some hints about. It tells you the story about Medusa and how he I forgot who it was. Was it Hercules? Whoever uses a mirror to like shine her reflection back at her and turn her to stone.
Perseus.
Perseus, yeah.
Perseus.
Yeah. So you get that, right? And then you pick up these mirrors from a chest. I think it somehow connects to these guys, but really that's all the info you have going into this. So the game kind of expects you to put all that together and be like, okay, well, I have to use these mirrors for this task. But something horrible you can do is that I think you can break these mirrors if you get attacked while holding them.
And then shank a monster?
No, I wish that would be cool, right? But if that happens, then that's a game over state. But it doesn't have a game over. It just lets you keep going. So you'll have this broken mirror and you're just fucked. But the solution is to just put them up here on these little statues. And it's a conscious design thing, like, the mirror being broken, because they want you to try and creep around and not get hit by these guys, kind of amp the challenge. But it's such a punishing
Sure.
thing. Oh,
There it goes.
so there goes those guys.
Same thing happens to me when I see my morning reflection.
After a long night of drinking. Oh!
Drinking. Milk, maybe.
So yeah, it's interesting that you have these challenges. Like, I guess those aren't enemies; they're more obstacles. But that you can, this game allows you to circumnavigate combat encounters, not only as like, oh, I will unload this much amount of ammo into these monsters and I've solved the problem, but it also let you be clever. If you're paying attention to items in the world, you'll be able to, defeat these encounters without ever having to actually fight in them, which I think is an interesting option that they give the player.
Yeah, absolutely.
The world, the better you can do in the world.
Yep. And then you never know. When you give more options to the player, then as we know, the player may end up doing things that we had never intended them to do. And obviously, the more options increases the chances of that happening more often.
Right.
That's exactly right.
If you look at something like Prey, obviously that's not entirely a survival horror game, but it's got so many systemic things going on that just madness and chaos happens. Crazy things are happening. Obviously, a horror game, you have to try and constrain the thematic. You have to constrain the gameplay range and mechanics to kind of fit thematically.
Right.
Oh yeah.
But it is interesting when you can give the player cool options.
Let them think outside the box. Yeah.
Yeah. And I also think it helps, like, because really, if you're in a survival horror scenario, you're like, okay, I'm fighting something bigger and badder than me, or I'm trying to run away from it. I'm just trying to survive. If I throw these items in my inventory at it and then push it away to run past it, or lead it lead it into a trap or anything like that. Lock the door behind me.
Absolutely. Running is an important option.
Yeah. But then you have this, this scenario where you're trapped. You know, they've set it up so that you are trapped in this scenario. You gotta fight this guy.
Yep.
I have no weapons except for the broken saber blade. And it's pretty tense. It's pretty tense when you hit this for the first time and you're like, oh no, I have no health and I'm trapped.
You feel weak. Now you're off to Neverland.
Yep. Oh, I didn't. Should have made a save after that. That's okay. We can explore the mansion a little more.
Thanks.
These
Yeah,
characters are as far as poly counts.
Yeah, like you can see his leg is probably like, what is that, like 9 triangles altogether?
Yep. That is amazing.
You know, then it's interesting because there's parts of the mansion that are gated. Ooh, spooky laughed. There's parts of the mansion that are gated that you can't get to, but this area, it like opens up and it lets you kind of. There's obviously a right. The problem with this in this game, the openness, is that there's a critical path to doing things. You know, you'll just encounter stuff that you won't be able to tackle at that moment. But it's kind of fun, thinking about our game because, we will have an open environment that you can explore and run into things that aren't necessarily attached to the main plot, but are just kind of happening in this own little section of the world.
Oh yeah.
Little extra morsels for you. To touch on that point that you were basically making about sound design, somewhat, and potentially spoiling a scare. I absolutely agree that there are times where sound design can be used maybe too much in a sense where, just like you were talking about on that staircase with those two creatures, that it tells you that something's going to happen before you would have maybe picked up on it yourself, and then kind of cheapens what you had tried to do to begin with, I guess.
Totally. And
don't do it. Don't do it.
Yeah. So, man, I'm trying to figure out how to use this lamp.
To touch on kind of the open nature of Rose Rock compared to maybe even a game like Silent Hill 1, where even Silent Hill is very compartmentalized in these sections where you're not necessarily having access to this entire space. So I think our title will really be something new in that aspect, where you've never really just got to explore this huge accessible town.
Right.
Oh, most definitely.
There you go. Take care of those guys.
Can you interact with that armor?
Yeah. So he comes to life.
Oh.
And he starts making your day bad. So it's kind of interesting that, in other games it probably would not be advisable for you to have a point of interest that just starts attacking you, right? But survival horror, you're constantly trying to do stuff like that. That's like the core of the game.
make the player feel as weak as possible, so they can just barely scrape by.
Yeah, and that danger can come out of anywhere, right?
Right.
And I mean, surviving that is very rewarding.
Exactly.
But later on, you do get an item to tackle that and try and take care of that enemy. So it kind of gives you, that accomplishment, the feeling of accomplishment of taking care of it.
When you say feeling of accomplishment, you mean like in the sense that EA means, or do you mean like in the way that everybody else means?
And
Just got killed by that turkey thing.
yeah, I know. I can't tell what those things are supposed to be. They kind of look like dogs with like chicken legs or something.
That's a mean turkey, is what it is.
Yeah. Well, we could keep playing this. I highly recommend. It's obviously an old game. It's a little hard to get into, but if you're a fan of this stuff, if you're a fan of visiting to the past, I would highly recommend picking this game up. So I don't want to spoil anything else for anybody, but there's a lot of cool stuff happening in it. Do you guys have any like closing remarks, closing observations that you took away from checking this out or anything?
Well,
I guess for me,
go ahead.
Brandon,
No, go ahead. I figured we were going to do that. You go ahead.
I was gonna say for me, it's kind of nice to see that have changed, just with survival horror in general, with gameplay in general, actually, and some of the things that we can keep the same. I know that's very obscure.
Right, but you
Sounds.
can't be giving a lot of details away.
Exactly. And the sound is awesome, but sometimes having no sound, no ambient sound, no thematic music, terrifying. Just hearing your own footsteps.
Yep.
This game is pretty amazing for early '90s. It looks like.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about just like the smoke and mirrors that this game's created, it's a flat image with a 2D grid overlaid on it, and it's just checking across this grid like, okay, at this XY point, there is a kitchen sink, so you can't walk here.
I'm thinking of, like, just from the technical side too, like all those animations, like those polygons are probably just plotted in like what I would consider to be OpenGL now.
Yeah,
but
just
it was probably something different back
the
then.
raw polygon coordinates in a file.
Just the vertex points,
Yeah.
and then let me figure out how to make this dude walk by moving each individual vert. Pretty impressive.
And for like as hard as it probably was to like make all that animation for all the characters, like it's all here. They're all fully realized. They all have a bunch of actions.
Yeah.
The player, when he gets attacked, he has like a response animation. It's like it's fully fleshed out. It's just obviously you can imagine if they had 20 years of games that came out and technology upgrades,
Oh yeah.
it would be a much slicker experience.
Yep.
I think that's the big ticket, and what I would say is that competition is important, and it's important in all industries, but in this case, speaking to just the survival horror genre, like you said, this predates quite a few different games, let alone series and long time standing series, and they've had a long time to learn, basically, and so it's cool to see where things are starting and kind of where they went over the time that we've been playing games, and like Ryan said, it's cool to see how things have changed and how things stay the same, and to sum everything up, we will be drawing just as much inspiration from previous survival horror titles that were very important to the genre, just as much as they did to maybe even a game like this.
Totally.
Totally.
I mean, it's a lot to unpack, but you know, I don't
Not
know
a
where I was
thing.
going with that thought. I was still unpacking it all.
Well, short.
I
Long
really
story
love that
short,
view.
Wait, what was that?
Really loved that view.
Oh yeah, this camera angle is very cool.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's one thing. I guess I'll say my little piece too about this game real quick, and then we'll probably sign off. But you know, something I've been that I think is lacking in games, and especially survival horror games, is that they don't ever treat the camera as like a tool that can be used in this way to like make things more dramatic, right? So this fight, it's a little bit harder because of this angle, but it just feels a lot more dramatic when you're like at this angle. You're trying to back up, and you're like, you know, trying to fight from here.
They've switched everything to cinematics for the most part.
Right, yeah, there's that clear line between like, oh, I'm doing something in the game to, oh, I'm watching something. And there's not like a blending of the two where it's like trying to do this thing, but I'm also like a voyeur in a way. Like I'm still like this third person like seeing this scene. So having a dramatic camera angle kind of heightens that in a cinematic way and makes that gameplay just a little bit more tense.
Oh yeah, most definitely.
I think that has to be like a clear design choice at some point. You know, do you have a game be designed around that? Do you have it be an amalgam of a half and half, or do you have it be sparingly between there? Because I agree, it's great to have dramatic angles that can definitely be used effectively. But then at the same time, say for instance, you had a game that you didn't have, but maybe 2 instances of that, the player may find it more annoying than they would, find it effective, I guess you could say.
No,
But
yeah, you totally have to, you would have to set it up as like a mechanic in a way of like a mechanic like anything else, right?
like the old school,
Yeah.
basically like the old school Resident Evils, right, where it was that style. Different camera angles, right, and different locations. Is that what you're gathering?
Well, just just that the camera is also this entity, right? So like, if you're getting damaged and like the camera is like closing in closer and closer on the character, like from a third-person view,
Mm-hmm.
then that will heighten the tension. It obscures, your full range of vision. So just things like that. Treating the camera as like a part of the world.
But yeah, it's like a supporting character.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But yeah, did you guys have any other thoughts, things you want to say?
No, other than I had a lot of, again, really cool to see where things are starting from. I hope actually that we can do this maybe again with some other titles, and have some more discussions, talk a little bit more about the upcoming game Rose Rock, talk maybe a little bit about our company Rogue Raven, and maybe some of our plans. But thanks for doing this with us, Caleb.
Yeah, no problem. All right, guys, it's been a lot of fun.
Thank you, man.
Thanks.